came here as a political refugee in 1983. I was about 8 years old. And you know, when you were in the refugee camp, there's a lot of there's illness, starvation. You're inside barbed wire, and so you have this mindset that America is paradise. But when we got here, it wasn't exactly paradise. There was a lot of racial discriminations, and so that whole experience had really led me to want to do something about that. My background is actually IT, information technology. So I've been doing that for probably 15 years now. I'm currently a part-time IT manager for the Greater Minneapolis Crisis Nursery. In 2007, I took a sabbatical leave to do community organizing. And so that led me to the terminology, and then got me a chance to work with all the other communities of color. Our existence, our future really depend on our ability to be accountable towards each other, to be each other's partner. And so when the seat opened up in special election 2013, I felt that I had there was this calling that I needed to serve, and that I needed to do everything I can to bring the community together, because I felt that just because I made enough money, I got a house, I got a vehicle, but what about all the other people that didn't have it? Right? Like it was meaningless if I only had those opportunities, those options. It would have been more meaningful if other people had the same opportunity. My importance in the world depends on what I'm willing to do to help other people. I think the essence of human experience is dignity, right? To have human dignity, and to understand what anti-racism and what racism is, that racism strips away our human dignity. And so I think once we understand this, then we can measure racial injustice or racial equity in a way that people have dignity, they're respected, and that because they have that, they also have access to opportunity. Some really tangible goal for the city of St. Paul is that, like I said earlier, for the employee, the workforce here to be reflective of the community. That includes all departments, the fire, police department especially, to just really fulfill the promise of our four founding fathers that said that government is for the people, by the people. And if you look at it right now, government is usually for the people by just a certain group of people. And I think that the diversity in our city, it's really our strength. And I think that I want other city and other country to look at St. Paul and say, wow, how did they get to that point? How can we get there? What do we need to do? Can we go to them and learn from them?
I was given an opportunity to be led and taught leadership with the NAACP, the Urban League, my church. And so all of that was coming together. What had been happening with me as a child, what I was seeing around me, it was unjust. It was unfair. And I did not think that what I was going to do and speak of, and the protest I was involved in was called anti-racism. It was called fighting for justice. It was called fighting for equality, for dignity, respect. Do not strip me of my identity and my dignity. It's in me. I don't know. I can't tell you why. But white supremacy is not working for us all. We all have a story, we all have a stake in it, and we have all made contributions. And even the curriculum in the schools, that's not really reflecting the reality of the contributions that many of the children's ancestors have made. They don't see themselves. And I think young people have to see themselves and see the possibilities, and then they're ready to be led. They're ready to be helpful. You know what I'm most proud of? I'm a child of the Rondo community. And I have been, as I've come to realize, I guess a community educator all of my life without recognizing that's what I was. And I found that my purpose in life is bringing people together. I see a world that has the capacity for holding all of us together. And so that's what I've tried to do, even the work with the young people. I feel so honored that some of the young people that I worked with earlier in education, they're now carrying on the work. It wasn't my intention to teach them to do thus and so, but it was all geared towards people living in a world together, respecting each other, lifting each other up, making the world a better place. If that's called anti-racism, that's my work, my purpose. That's what I have to do. So what I would say to our community is be the beloved community. Be the people we've been talking about and waiting for. Be the teachers that you've always wanted. Be the communicators. Be the best of what God would have us all be.
Community work, I think, was really embedded into my family. We were really active in our church growing up, and so I did mission trips and I participated in youth programs, and service was always a key component of what we did as a family, but also school and how we participated in the neighborhood around us. And so much of my activism, so much of my work in the community really was rooted in Catholic social teaching and really a family commitment to social justice. I went to school for public relations and I went to the University of St. Thomas, and so really got the sense that I was being trained up to be an agency executive, to go into public relations and media campaigns and things like that. And along the way, I got caught up in student activism and student organizing, and really started to look around and notice that I was on a predominantly white campus, and I was doing lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender organizing, and also students of color organizing, and really looked around and felt pretty isolated and didn't see a lot of opportunities to be a part of the larger fabric of the campus community. So that inspired a lot of the work that I started doing around student organizing. And that spurred into over 10 years of working at the intersection of race and equity and philanthropy. So I was off doing my work that I was really defining as improving philanthropy, making it more representative, and folks kept saying, "We want you in this conversation about race. We think you have something to add." And I really resisted that for a long time. I didn't want to be labeled as that person. I wanted to be seen as a whole person and not just someone who was there to talk about race because I was a young person of color. What I realized was the opportunity to be at those tables in those conversations gave me a chance to pose big questions, to think with leaders in a different way, and to really push a field that had taken care of me and welcomed me in to think bigger about how it was addressing community problems. And that often meant, which communities are we missing? And have we explicitly started to address race in our work? And when I think about what I'm looking forward to or what I'm hopeful about, I think about some of the systemic changes. So I'm hopeful about the women of color that I see running for state office. I'm hopeful about the governor's proposal to increase state funding to address racial disparities. I'm hopeful about the conversations that I'm hearing in philanthropy about targeting communities of color with very specific funding to undo some of the damage. So while we see and hear stories every day about how hard it is, and there's truth in that, it's important to hear about the lived experience and the difficulties. I remain hopeful because communities are keeping pressure on our leaders, and we're electing our own leaders, and we're pushing governors, and we're pushing philanthropic leaders. And so I'm hopeful that our systems are becoming more and more responsive.
I've been involved in anti-racism work since my early 20s. Started at about 21. I just said there's got to be a different way, and we need to. And then, going through the civil rights in the 60s, becoming very proud of who I am in terms of my hair, Black power, and Black is beautiful. It really gave me some self-pride and began to really help shape that I need to be a part of this. And I came here in September of 2000. And they had built such a good foundation around civic engagement and real estate that I had a really great foundation to really think about using that as my platform and my fertile ground to really begin to look at how can we expand our services and do more. We wanted to look at the continuum in terms of housing, equitable housing and access to housing. So we do both rental now, multifamily rental, as well as home ownership, as along this continuum to really build stable communities, and so that people can have access to housing that's decent, you can afford it, and there's multiple ways to get into the housing as well. So with that, we also begin to even enhance and tool up our business development piece. We started back in 1994 with Neighborhood Development Center to really begin to look at the local economy. And by that I mean, how do we really take community folk, teach them the skills to become their own owners of their own commercial space and to contribute to the local economy. So we have a Power 1+1 resident leadership program that we tweaked and retooled it so that we actually have trained over 100 residents in the neighborhood to be advocates on under their own power. With that good foundation and really building some other good partnerships with model cities, Greater Frogtown CDC at that time, some other allies, we were able to produce University in Dale. We were able to produce Frogtown Square. And now we're working and finishing up Western U Plaza. And that's, not only are those projects important in terms of just in redeveloping our neighborhood and creating stable neighborhoods, it's really important in terms of the light rail itself. We actually help address displacement. It's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. And that's why we called our resident leadership program the Power 1+1, because the more you build 1+1, generations of 1+1, they're going to carry on the work, and that they are going to create a better world.
I've always been interested in working with youth and in the community as a sociologist, and for the most part has a heavy concentration on crime and delinquents and deviants. I went into counseling, but even in that process I was working with folks who are in prisons. When people ask me, what do you do? I often say, I teach. But I'm also, in many ways, a recovering criminologist, in the sense that the job that we do has always been one that teaches about the system and does some critical analysis of the system, but doesn't really explore change to deeper levels. So I do a lot of work inside prisons, so spend time with men mostly, prisons, working with them in terms of exploring why they are there and what happens now that you are here, right? How do you spend your time in a productive way so that you are thinking about the day when you step out, and you're thinking about 1 week after you are out, 2 weeks after you are out, what is life going to be like? Even though for some of them it is a long road ahead. But my job, my hope is to keep them hopeful. We have a level of humanity that can continuously grow. We saw that in Dr. King. We saw that in Martin Luther King. We saw that in many other Gandhis, right? We saw that human beings have the potential of rising to that level that is beyond people's imagination. And they can be loving. They can be forgiving. What happened in South Africa under Bishop Desmond Tutu, right? I mean, these individuals demonstrated that humanity has no limits. So, I mean, you can launch a rocket to the moon or and do space traveling, because all of that is based on mathematical calculations. But human beings are much more complex than that. But dealing with us is messy. And that's what makes this job interesting in that sense, right? Because I want to be able to understand that messiness and work towards building our capacity to be better beings.
I'm very fortunate. In many ways, we think about community engagement as the work of the whole museum in some ways. But I'm very lucky because I get to work with a group of people who are thinking about access and thinking about ways to connect this museum and the work that we do to a very broad community. It's inspiring to me that people are interested in being in dialogue, being in conversations about issues of race and racism. And we're seeing that here at the museum, and I know that that's happening at through other work that organizations are doing as well. I've been in the museum field for a long time, and I worked for many, many years at the Children's Museum in Boston, and a lot of the work that I did was about race and identity, both around culture and ethnicity, but for children. But I also feel like it's very important to try to find ways to heal and try to find ways for people to understand and ways for people to see what's going on and to understand the complexities of these situations. We have an exhibition here that we developed here at the Science Museum with the American Anthropological Association that's called Race, Are We So Different? And it's looking at this construct of race from a biological perspective, a historical perspective, and what we call a contemporary lived experience. So we talk about that in the exhibition about ways that race and racism impact our systems of inequality, so education, healthcare, wealth disparities, and housing. So that's because of the work here at the museum and because of the race exhibition and because of the equity work that we're doing in terms of thinking about access and thinking about, we've been working with the city of St. Paul on developing and supporting the work that the city is doing around racial equity. I'm thinking about it a lot. And I can't say, oh, come to the Science Museum and your problems will be solved. I think we have an exhibition, we have a perspective, we have tools that people can use to try to understand and try to be in dialogue, which I think are very important. I hope that we can be some kind of catalyst and that there's ultimately that we're all working together in a way to address some of these inequalities, because I think that's where change happens.